My name is Dorothy Hale. I am 68 years old, and for most of my life, I worked as a hospice caregiver in Austin, Texas. People often assume my work taught me about endings, yet it quietly taught me about beginnings. I learned how fragile dignity can be, how easily a life can tip into silence, and how love sometimes requires stepping into fire. That truth found me again in the morning. I discovered my daughter living as a maid in the $3.3 million house I bought for her. She stood there in a torn apron, kneeling on the cold tile floor, scrubbing a stain that should never have been hers to clean. When she lifted her head and looked at me, she did not recognize her own mother. That moment carved a line in my soul, and before my breath even steadied, I found myself whispering the words that would anchor my resolve. When I found my daughter living as a maid in the $3.3 million house I bought her, she did not even recognize me as her mother. I calmly called my lawyer and said, "It is time for justice." I remember the weight of the Texas summer air as I walked up the stone path to her home. The house rose before me with its quiet arrogance, wide glass windows, trimmed hedges, the kind of property people stop to photograph. I once thought it would offer Lena safety. Instead, it became the stage for a truth I was never meant to see. When I knocked on the door, I heard hurried footsteps, not confident, not free. The kind of footsteps a person makes when they are trying not to upset someone. The door opened slowly. My daughter, 33 years old, once strong-willed and bright-eyed, now stood with her shoulders curved inward. A strand of hair stuck to her cheek. Her hands were red from scrubbing. There was a faint tremble in her fingers. She looked at me for several seconds. Her eyes moved across my face as if scanning a stranger on the sidewalk. Her voice was soft, almost rehearsed. "Ma'am, who are you looking for?" Ma'am, a word she had never used with me in her entire life. A word that told me something had collapsed within her. Before I could answer, Graham Pierce appeared behind her. He was her former high school boyfriend, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, a man I had once felt uneasy around but could never explain why. He placed his hand on Lena's shoulder, not gently, not lovingly, but with a kind of quiet possession. His thumb pressed into the fabric of her apron as if signaling ownership. He looked at me with polite indifference, the kind people use when they believe they hold the upper hand. Something inside me tightened, yet I kept my voice steady. A lifetime in hospice teaches you how to speak while carrying a storm. I said nothing for a moment. I only looked at Lena, truly looked, searching for the girl who once ran barefoot through our backyard with chalk on her hands and sunlight in her hair. Her eyes flickered with something I could not name: hope, fear, shame, recognition. They drifted toward me, then away, like someone remembering a melody they no longer believe they are allowed to hum. A single thought rose inside my chest, sharp, steady, undeniable. My child has been taken from herself, not by force or chains, but by something quieter, something far more dangerous, a mind bent until it believes the ground beneath it is the only ground it deserves. At that moment, time slowed around me. The ceiling fan hummed somewhere inside the house. A scent of bleach drifted into the doorway. Birds called from the oak trees lining the street. Everything in the world kept moving, yet my heart stood still. I could hear my husband's old refrain echoing like a gentle warning. Protect her when she cannot protect herself. He had said that on the night Lena was born. The memory flickered across my mind like an old photograph, his hands trembling as he held her. Now, years later, I felt the same tremble returning to my own hands. I wanted to pull her into my arms. I wanted to tell her she was safe. I wanted to break open the quiet cage she was living in. But I also understood something deeper, something hospice work had taught me for decades. Liberation begins when a person feels seen, not forced. So I stayed still. I softened my shoulders. I let my breath even out. Silence can be an act of protection when used with intention. Inside my mind, I whispered to her, "My child, I am here, and I see everything." But aloud, I said only one sentence: "I would like to speak with my daughter." Lena flinched, a tiny movement, yet it rippled through me like thunder. Graham stepped forward, his tone silky, false, controlled. "She is busy today. You should go." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply stepped back, my hand resting over the small wooden bead necklace I carried in my pocket. It belonged to my late husband. It steadied me now. I nodded gently, glanced at Lena one more time, and walked down the path. When I reached the sidewalk, I took out my phone. My fingers did not shake. My voice did not waver. I dialed the number of the one person who had stood beside me through the darkest seasons of my life, Maribel Cross, my attorney and friend. The moment she answered, I spoke the words I had held inside my chest since the door first opened. "Maribel, it is time." I ended the call, the sun catching on the windshield of a passing car, the weight of truth settling on my shoulders with steady purpose. I knew this was only the beginning. I knew everything I had seen was a doorway into a past I would have to revisit and a future I would fight to reclaim. And I knew that what happened next would unravel not only a story of control and silence, but a story of a mother who refused to lose her child to the shadows. Before we continue, take a quiet moment to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps these stories reach those who may need them most. From here, let us return to the past, to the foundation of how everything began. I walked away from Lena's house with the Texas heat settling on my shoulders, yet the heaviness I carried had nothing to do with summer. As I reached the end of the street, a memory rose inside me with the same clarity as the day it happened. It was the memory of who I used to be long before life carved its lessons into my hands. I saw myself at 22, standing in a borrowed wedding dress, holding the hand of the man who would shape the rest of my life. His name was Elijah Hale. Gentle, stubborn, endlessly patient. He loved me in a way that felt like a vow even before we exchanged our vows. When Lena was born, he held her as if the world had just handed him its most fragile truth. That night in the hospital, he whispered that our daughter was our horizon. I remember watching him rock her, the soft rhythm of his hands, the way the light touched them. That memory still anchors me, even now. Our life was never extravagant, but it was full. I worked long shifts as a hospice caregiver. Elijah worked at a local carpentry shop. Money was tight. We shared one car, we cooked simple meals, we learned how to stretch hope farther than income. Yet there was joy, a quiet joy, the kind that grows from partnership instead of circumstance. When Elijah crafted a necklace from small wooden beads to mark Lena's first birthday, I knew it would become more than a gift. It would become the heart of our family story. I still keep it with me, its surface worn smooth by years of worry and prayer. It reminds me who we were before loss arrived. That loss came on a morning no different from any other. Elijah had been feeling tired for weeks. He brushed it off as stress, said he simply needed rest. But as he stood at the kitchen counter pouring his coffee, he paused, pressed a hand to his chest, and gave me a look I will never forget. It was a look that held apology and fear at the same time. He collapsed before I could reach him. The doctors told me his heart had given out. I remember the sound of Lena crying in another room, the kettle boiling over, and my own breath breaking apart. Grief is not loud. Grief is the slow unraveling of 1,000 small certainties. I became both mother and father that day, not by choice, but by necessity. Lena was 7, full of curiosity, always asking questions about the stars. She climbed into my lap that night and whispered that she would grow up fast so she could protect me. I told her she did not need to grow up fast. I told her she simply needed to be a child, but life rarely listens to what a mother wants. I worked double shifts, sometimes triple, wiped tears from patients' faces as they waited for the end, then came home to bandage scraped knees and help with school projects. I learned how to keep going even when the weight of the world felt tilted against me. Years passed. Lena grew into a quiet but brilliant young woman. She studied architecture. She dreamed about designing homes that made people feel protected. I wanted to give her a foundation strong enough to hold those dreams. So when she was accepted into a firm in Austin and needed a place to live, I sold the land Elijah had left us, then sold our old house, the one where we had raised her. Every nail, every window, every memory. I put all of it toward purchasing the $3.3 million home she now lived in. It was the most extravagant thing I had ever done, but I did it with a full heart. I wanted her to have a life unburdened by scarcity. I wanted her to step into every room with confidence, and I wanted her to feel the presence of her father in every corner of that new home. Yet life has a way of turning even our greatest offerings into unexpected lessons. When I turned 64, my health took a quiet turn. A doctor in Austin told me my lungs were weakening, that if I did not change environments, I might not have more than 5 years left. I sat in my car afterward, hands trembling over the steering wheel, thinking of Lena and the possibility of leaving her the way Elijah left me. A friend told me about a long-term treatment program in New Zealand, a place with clean air, gentle climate, space for the body to rest. I hesitated for weeks. Leaving felt like abandonment. Staying felt like surrender. One night, after a long shift with a patient who passed away minutes after whispering that her only regret was becoming a burden, I finally understood my truth. I did not leave because I wanted distance. I left because I was terrified of becoming a weight on the child I loved more than anything in the world. Even now, as I touch the wooden bead necklace in my pocket, I remember telling myself that going away was an act of love, that saving my life was a way of protecting hers. I told Lena that I needed fresh air and a temporary treatment. I did not tell her the doctor's full warning. I wanted to spare her. I thought I was making the right choice. But standing outside her house today, seeing what she has become under Graham's shadow, I wonder whether she felt abandoned instead of protected. That question cuts deeper than any diagnosis ever could. My steps slowed as I reached my car. The past and present folded into each other. The mother I used to be gazing at the mother I am now. One carried a child on her hip. One now carries regret in her chest, but both hold the same unbroken truth. I will walk through fire if it means bringing my daughter home to herself again. And so, with the memory of Elijah's last promise echoing through me, I opened the car door and prepared for the journey into everything that had been left unsaid. By the time I returned to Lena's house that evening, the sky over Austin had shifted to a muted shade of blue, the kind that arrives just before night decides whether it will be gentle or unforgiving. I parked across the street. The engine was ticking softly as it cooled. A faint drizzle began to fall, droplets tapping on the windshield in an uneven rhythm. My fingers brushed over the wooden bead necklace in my pocket, its familiar shape grounding me as I stepped out of the car. I moved toward the house slowly, careful not to draw attention. From the shadows beneath the magnolia tree, I could see straight through the tall front windows. The interior lights cast a warm glow across the polished floors, a glow that should have felt welcoming. Instead, it carried a stiffness I could not ignore. And then I saw her. Lena stood near the dining table, wiping each chair leg with a thin cloth. Her movements were precise and controlled, too controlled, as if she were waiting for an invisible signal. Her shoulders curved inward, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the floor rather than the room around her. I watched as Graham walked into the frame. He moved with a casual confidence that belonged to someone who believed he owned the space he occupied. He snapped his fingers once. A single, sharp sound. Lena jerked slightly, a subtle flinch, the kind a person gives when they are used to anticipating consequences. She rushed to the counter to pick up another cloth, her hands trembling as she folded it. Then she turned, and her wrist caught the light. I saw the faint shadow of a bruise along her inner arm, a deepening mark just beneath the skin. She tugged her sleeve down quickly, her eyes darting toward the hallway. My breath locked in my chest. I pressed my palm against the rain-cooled window pane, though I stood entirely outside. I could feel the heaviness of what I was seeing. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was worse than that. It was the quiet erosion of a young woman who once held the world with bright confidence. My Lena, who built model houses out of cardboard and colored tape. My Lena, who believed she could design buildings that made strangers feel safe. My Lena, who used to laugh with her whole body, tilting her head back as if joy came from the sky. Now she moved like a shadow in her own home. For a moment, the rain thickened, droplets streaking the glass and blurring my view. I wiped the surface with my sleeve, the cold seeping through the fabric. As my vision cleared, I saw Graham stepping closer to her. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch her. He simply stood behind her, his posture straight, his presence filling the entire space. Lena stiffened. She lifted a vase from the table and polished it with careful precision, her breath catching each time the cloth slipped. Her fear was not theatrical. It was silent, disciplined, deeply ingrained, the kind a person carries when they no longer trust their own choices. A tremor passed through me. I felt every ounce of distance between us during the years I spent in New Zealand. I thought I was preserving her by staying away. I thought I was protecting her from the weight of my illness. But standing there with rain softening my hair and pressing into my coat, I felt the truth settle around me. I had left, her alone with a world I no longer understood, and she had walked straight into the arms of someone willing to take everything from her. The question rose before I could stop it. Was this my fault? Had my absence become the thread that allowed all of this to unravel? I thought of the promises I whispered into her hair when she was small. I thought of the nights I worked double shifts to give her stability. I thought of Elijah's quiet advice to protect her when she could not protect herself. Had I failed that vow? Had I mistaken distance for sacrifice? The moral conflict twisted inside me. Grief and guilt can look identical once they find a place to settle. I wanted to burst through the door. I wanted to shout her name, but I knew that forcing myself into the moment would only drive her deeper into the shadows Graham had built around her. Control thrives on fear, and fear thrives on disruption. If I barged in, it would give him more power, not less. So I stepped back, letting the drizzle gather into a steady rain. I walked beneath the front awning, water dripping from the gutter above, my breath fogging in the cool night air. I wrapped my fingers around the wooden bead necklace. It pressed into my palm with a weight both familiar and painful. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the texture of each bead remind me of the promises Elijah and I once made to our daughter. Promises that had not vanished, even if they had been strained. The slow pivot arrived quietly, like a shift in the wind. I looked at the house again, but this time with a deeper clarity. I was not here to witness my failures. I was here to reclaim what mattered. The rain softened, the porch light flickered, the world around me held its breath. I straightened my spine and stepped away from the window. The storm inside me steadied. I knew what I had seen. I knew what needed to be uncovered. And I knew that this house, once meant to protect my daughter, had become a silent cage she did not know how to escape. As I walked back toward my car, the last thought of the night settled in my chest with quiet certainty. This was not the end of my strength. It was the beginning of it. The next morning, the rain had not yet lifted from Austin. The sky looked bruised, low, uncertain. I drove to the familiar brick building where Maribel Cross kept her office. I had walked through those doors years ago after Elijah died, numb with shock, clutching death certificates and medical bills with trembling hands. Back then, Maribel guided me through a darkness I could not navigate alone. She had become more than a lawyer. She had become a steady voice when my own felt too broken to use. When I stepped inside, she glanced up from her desk. Her dark hair, streaked with early silver, was pulled back into a low twist. Her eyes were sharp, observant, and soft in the way people become soft only after surviving their own storms. She stood and opened her arms slightly, not a full embrace, but an invitation for steadiness. "Dorothy," she said, her voice low. I could tell by the way she studied my face that she already sensed something had shifted. I sat across from her, the wooden bead necklace held in my palm beneath the table. I took a breath before speaking. "Maribel, I saw Lena yesterday. Something is wrong. Something is deeply wrong." She did not interrupt me. She simply nodded once, a gesture that said I could continue without fear of being dismissed. So I told her what I had witnessed. The torn apron, the flinch when Graham snapped his fingers, the bruise on her wrist, the empty gaze that did not belong to the daughter I raised. Maribel leaned back slightly, her fingers steepled, her focus unwavering. "Tell me everything you saw. Every detail matters." Her tone was controlled, but I could feel the quiet urgency beneath it. I described each moment as clearly as I could. When I finished, the room felt heavy with unspoken calculations. Maribel turned to her computer, pulled up a digital file, and rotated the screen slightly so I could see. I recognized the layout before she even spoke. It was the deed for the house I had purchased for Lena. "Dorothy," she said, "you and I signed the original documents together, but I received a flagged update from the title company last month. I thought it was a clerical error, but now I am not so sure." She clicked a few times. The updated deed appeared. My heart dropped. A new signature had been added. It was supposed to be Lena's, but I knew my daughter's handwriting the way a pianist knows the keys beneath their fingers. This version was stiff, uneven, rushed. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. "This is not her signature," I said quietly. Maribel nodded. "I agree, and that is not the only concern." She opened another file. This time, a bank document appeared. This account was originally in Lena's name only, but 3 months ago, Graham's name was added as a joint holder. I felt the air tighten around me, added without her consent, or with consent given under pressure. "Pressure can be a kind of forgery," she said. A memory flashed across my mind. Lena, at 12 years old, proudly practicing her signature over and over on scrap paper. She wanted it to look strong, confident, independent. The version on the screen was none of those things. It was the handwriting of someone who had been cornered. Maribel studied the page again. There is a pattern here. Quiet shifts, gradual control, intentional dependency. Someone like Graham does not need obvious coercion. He uses subtle pressure, emotional leverage, isolation. This is not uncommon in psychological control cases. I closed my eyes briefly, the weight of responsibility pressing into my ribs. Had I left her vulnerable by leaving? Had my absence created the space he needed to take root in her life? The moral question rose again. Was this my doing? Maribel watched me carefully. "Dorothy, you cannot blame yourself for what another adult chose to do. What matters now is that you came to me, and that means there is still a path forward." I looked at her, steadying my voice. "I do not want Lena embarrassed. I do not want her feeling judged or cornered. I only want her safe." Her expression softened. "Then, that is exactly what we will fight for. Quietly, precisely, strategically." She leaned forward, voice lowering. "Graham operates in what I call the gray zone. Not enough for obvious charges, but enough to manipulate someone until they cannot identify where their own decisions end and his begin. These cases require patience and evidence, but they can be won, especially if we start now." She reached for a yellow legal pad and began making notes. A list of property discrepancies, a list of financial shifts, a list of signs of coercion. Her pen moved steadily. Everything about her presence felt anchored, deliberate, calm in a way that invited my own calmness to return. "Dorothy," she said finally, "you are not alone in this. I will help you with everything. We will uncover every detail until we understand exactly what Graham has been doing. And when the time comes, we will use the truth to bring Lena back to solid ground." I tightened my grip on the wooden beads. For the first time since seeing Lena the day before, I felt a quiet steadiness settle inside me. This was the beginning of the fight I had not wanted but could no longer avoid. Maribel closed the file gently. "When you are ready, we begin." I nodded. I was ready. More ready than I had been for anything in years. Maribel asked me to return the next afternoon so she could gather more documents. When I arrived, she already had a stack of files spread across her desk. The blinds behind her were half closed, letting in a narrow slice of afternoon light that cut across the papers like a quiet spotlight. She motioned for me to sit, her expression calm but heavy with purpose. "Dorothy, I need you to look at something," she said. She opened a folder and turned the computer screen toward me. On it was a scanned document, a signature line at the bottom, Lena's name written in a shaky, uneven script. My breath shallowed. That is not her handwriting. Maribel nodded slowly. I compared this with multiple documents she signed for her employment paperwork 2 years ago. There is no match. This signature was written by someone not fully in control of their hand, either emotional duress or a compromised state. Her words were quiet, almost gentle, as if she were trying not to bruise what remained of my composure. She clicked again. Another document filled the screen, a consumer loan agreement. Lena's name was printed at the top as the borrower, but in the section labeled Purpose of Funds, there was a line item that read, Payment to G. Pierce. The number beside it was larger than anything Lena would ever spend on herself. I felt a deep, slow ache move through my chest. Why would she sign something like this? Maribel looked at me with a seriousness that held no judgment. People under psychological pressure sign things they do not understand. They are convinced it is temporary. They are told it is for love. They are taught to believe they owe something they never owed. She leaned back, tapping her pen once against the legal pad, and Graham knows exactly how to create that kind of pressure. I swallowed hard. The truth was beginning to arrange itself in front of me like an unwanted puzzle. Every piece revealed another fracture in my daughter's life, and yet I sat still. Stillness was the only way I could keep myself from breaking open. Maribel continued. There is also a concerning pattern of withdrawals, large ones. They all come from the joint account he added himself to. I checked timestamps. Many of these transactions happened late at night or early morning, times when people are least likely to think clearly. I pressed my fingers against the wooden bead necklace in my coat pocket. The familiar texture steadied my breath. I imagined Elijah standing behind me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder the way he used to when decisions felt too heavy. Maribel lowered her voice. Dorothy, this is not solely about money. This is about control. Financial dependency is one of the most silent forms of coercion. If he controls her access to resources, he controls her movements, her confidence, her sense of choice. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I closed my eyes for a moment. In that darkness, I saw Lena at 8 years old, building forts out of blankets, proudly telling me she would design skyscrapers one day. Her imagination had been fearless. Now her life was shrinking into the outlines of someone else's expectations. Maribel shifted another document forward. This one contained notes from the Homeowners Association security logs. I did not understand why she would show me that until she pointed to a line. Security spoke to a man on site. I contacted him. He agreed to meet you. His name is Gus. My brow tightened. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. The elderly man in the security booth at the entrance of Lena's neighborhood. His eyes were always kind, his posture slightly bent with age. He had waved at me the day I arrived back in town. Maribel said he has seen things, not enough to be evidence, but enough to give context. She stood and opened the door. As if on cue, Gus stepped inside. His cap was tucked beneath his arm. The rain outside had dampened the edges of his jacket. He looked at me with a mixture of respect and sorrow. "Mrs. Hale," he said quietly, "I am sorry to speak of your daughter this way, but someone needed to tell you." He shifted his weight, hands clasped in front of him. I have seen her outside late at night, more than once, crying, trying to walk to her car, then stopping like she remembered she was not allowed to go anywhere. My chest tightened. Not allowed. The phrase lingered like a bruise beneath the skin. Gus continued. "A few weeks ago, she asked me if I knew anyone who was hiring. Said she wanted to start working again. She seemed hopeful. But the next day, Graham came through the gate, and she was with him. She would not look up. He reached across to her to hand me their visitor log, and she just stood there, shoulders small like she was trying to hide. I felt something inside me sink, a quiet collapse, not anger, not a shock, something deeper, a grief that came from seeing a child's brightness dimmed by someone who claimed to care. I thanked Gus for his honesty. He nodded and stepped outside, leaving a silence that settled like dust across the room. Maribel spoke softly. "Dorothy, these moments matter. They are not legal proof yet, but they paint a clear picture of emotional manipulation, and that picture will guide how we move forward." I stared at the papers on the desk. Signatures that were not hers, loans she did not understand, withdrawals she never made, tears she cried alone in the dark. My voice came out quieter than I intended. I am not silent because I am weak. I am silent because I am listening to the truth reveal itself. Maribel closed the folder gently, and now that we know what we are fighting, we will prepare for what comes next. I drove back to Lena's house late the next afternoon. The rain had slowed to a thin mist, the kind that settles quietly on skin without announcing itself. I parked at the corner and walked along the narrow side path that led to the backyard. The garden looked overgrown, hydrangeas heavy with water, the grass uneven. It used to be Lena's favorite place. She once painted the fence soft blue and planted lavender along the walkway. Seeing it in this state felt like looking into the reflection of her spirit, dimmed but still holding the shape of what it used to be. I found her near the back porch, kneeling beside a planter box with torn gloves on her hands. Her hair fell in loose strands across her face. When she looked up, her eyes widened with something like surprise, then uncertainty, then a careful attempt at composure. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should not be here." I stepped forward slowly, not wanting to startle her. "I am not here to upset you. I just wanted to see you. Are you doing all right?" My tone was soft, steady, directed at her and only her. I did not mention Graham. I did not mention the documents or the bruises. I only asked the question a mother asks when the world has taken something from her child. Lena swallowed hard, her gaze shifting to the sliding glass door as if checking whether someone was listening. Her fingers tightened around the gardening gloves. I could feel the tension radiating from her body. It was not physical fear. It was the fear of being found saying the wrong words, the fear of invisible rules she had learned to obey. I crouched down to her level. "You do not have to explain anything. I just want to know how your heart is." Her breath hitched. She looked toward the door again. She did not answer. That was when I knew with painful clarity. This was not just sadness or confusion. This was psychological control. Her body held its shape around fear the way clay takes the shape of the mold pressed against it. Every gesture she made was cautious. Every word she withheld was strategic. She was living in anticipation of someone else's reaction. The sliding door opened with a soft click. Graham stepped out wearing a pressed shirt and an easy smile that did not touch his eyes. His presence changed the temperature of the air around us. He placed one hand in his pocket and surveyed the scene with amusement so subtle it could be mistaken for charm by someone who did not know him. "Dorothy," he said warmly, "what a surprise." I stood up slowly, keeping my posture relaxed. I did not mirror his smile. I did not shrink from his gaze. I turned to Lena instead. "I was just asking your mother a question," he said, stepping forward. His arm moved as if he might guide her back inside, a possessive gesture hidden beneath the illusion of care. Lena tensed. It was barely visible, but I saw it. Mothers always see it. I kept my voice steady. "I want to spend a moment with my daughter in the garden. It will not take long." Graham's expression paused, only for half a second, a flicker. Then he regained his composure. "Actually," he said politely, "now is not a good time." I nodded once. My voice remained calm. "May I come inside for a moment then?" "No." His answer came faster than he meant it to, sharper. He cleared his throat as if trying to soften it. "The house is not in order today." I watched him carefully, his stance, his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw when I did not back away. He expected resistance. He expected anger. He expected confrontation. What he did not expect was silence. So I simply smiled. A small, calm curve of the lips. A smile without fear. A smile without permission. A smile that said I saw far more than he wanted me to see. The power in that moment shifted. Not because I raised my voice, not because I challenged him, but because I refused to meet him in the arena he had prepared. Control thrives on predictable reactions. My silence disrupted the script he relied on. He shifted his weight, suddenly unsettled. Lena looked between us, confusion flickering across her face. For a brief second, I saw something in her eyes. A question, a possibility, a memory of who she used to be. I stepped back from the porch. "I will come another time," I said gently. "Lena, take care of yourself." Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but then she caught Graham's gaze and closed them again. I walked toward the side gate, the mist settling across my shoulders. I did not rush. I did not look back. I only held the wooden bead necklace in my hand, each bead pressing into my palm with quiet insistence. This was not defeat. This was strategy. The first step in reclaiming her was not confrontation. It was a presence, visible, steady, unshakable. As I reached the car, one truth echoed inside me with clear resolve. The power had begun shifting, not because he lost control, but because I stepped back into my daughter's world without fear. For the rest of that day, Lena's face stayed with me, the tremor in her breath, the way she glanced toward the door before answering even the simplest question. The quiet collapsed in her posture whenever Graham stepped near. All of it replayed in my mind with painful clarity as I sat in my parked car a block away from her house. I wanted to do something more than watch. I wanted to reach through the silence she was trapped in, but I also knew that direct confrontation would close the fragile space that had opened between us. I reached for the notepad I kept in the glove compartment. My hand trembled slightly as I tore out a small square of paper. I wrote only one sentence, a simple truth, a promise I meant with every breath in my body. You do not have to live like this. If you need me, I am here. I folded the note twice, then tucked it inside the pocket of my coat. I waited until the street was empty before stepping out of the car. The sky had begun to darken into the deep blue of early evening. A faint wind stirred the leaves along the sidewalk. I walked quietly toward the backyard fence, the same path I had taken the day before. The air smelled of damp soil and fading lavender. When I reached the garden, I moved with careful steps. The porch light had not yet turned on, so the shadows provided just enough cover. I slipped the small note beneath the edge of the planter box where I knew Lena often knelt to work. I brushed a bit of soil over the corner so it would stay hidden, but visible enough for someone who knew what to look for. My breath steadied as I whispered a silent prayer that she would find it. I turned to leave, but something told me to wait. A quiet instinct, a knowing only a mother could recognize. I stepped into the narrow space between the magnolia tree and the window where the shadows were deepest. Through the glass, I could see the warm light inside the kitchen. A kettle sat on the stove. The clock above the pantry glowed softly. The house looked peaceful from the outside, but I had already learned how deceptive that appearance could be. Within a few minutes, the sliding door opened. Lena stepped into the garden, tying her sweater tighter around her waist to shield herself from the cool air. She knelt near the planter box, exactly where I had hoped she would. She brushed aside a few wilted leaves, and her fingers stopped when they touched the edge of the folded paper. Her breath caught. Even from where I stood, I could see the sharp rise of her shoulders. She glanced back toward the house. Her eyes lingered on the door for a long moment before she slowly opened the note. Her hands trembled as she read the single sentence. Her lips parted in a shake of breath she tried to swallow. A tear gathered at the corner of her eye, catching the faint reflection of the porch light. She wiped it quickly with the back of her hand, then clutched the note tightly against her chest as if it were something fragile she had waited years to receive. Another tear followed. She blinked it away, looking again toward the house. Her fear was palpable, yet beneath it, I saw something else. A spark, a longing, a recognition. She folded the paper several times and tucked it into the small pocket sewn into the inside of her sweater. She pressed her palm over it as though anchoring courage beneath her ribs. I felt my throat tighten. Before stepping back inside, she turned her gaze toward the garden as if sensing someone watching. Her eyes scanned the shadows. For a brief moment, they hovered near the place where I stood, hidden by the branches. She did not see me, but I saw her. And in her expression, I saw a quiet truth unfold. She remembered me. She remembered herself. She remembered that she had a place to return to, even if she could not step toward it yet. She closed the door softly behind her. I stayed still for several minutes, listening to the wind move through the trees. The note had reached her, not in defiance, Not in rebellion, but in recognition. A recognition that told me my daughter was not lost, only misplaced in a life that did not belong to her. As I walked back toward my car, a steady warmth spread through my chest. For the first time since returning to Austin, I felt something shift in the air around us. It was not an escape. It was not freedom. But it was the first crack in the walls that held her, and every wall begins to crumble the moment the first crack appears. That night, a storm rolled across Austin with a quiet intensity. Lightning flickered along the horizon, illuminating the rooftops in brief flashes. I sat in my living room with the wooden bead necklace curled inside my palm, listening to the rumble of distant thunder. Each vibration seemed to echo the tension gathering inside me. I had left a note for Lena, and she had found it. That alone changed the air around us. But I knew it was only one step in a long path back to her. My phone buzzed on the table. Maribel's name glowed on the screen. I answered immediately. "Dorothy," she said, her voice steady but carrying weight. "I found something. I think you need to see it tonight." The urgency in her tone cut through the storm. I grabbed my coat and drove through the rain-soaked streets until I reached her office. The parking lot shimmered with reflections from passing headlights. Inside, Maribel had papers spread across the table, her expression sharper than I had seen in days. She gestured for me to sit. I received a call from a colleague in Houston who recognized Graham's name. He told me something I needed to verify, so I called the county clerk. Then she handed me a thin folder. It contains a complaint filed 6 years ago by a woman named Fiona Clark. I opened the folder slowly. The complaint was brief but painful to read. Fiona described meeting Graham, falling into a rushed relationship, then gradually losing control over her finances. Several lines mirrored what I had seen with Lena. Sudden joint accounts, unexpected loans, emotional isolation, and then, just as quickly as he appeared, Graham disappeared from Fiona's life, leaving her in debt and confusion. Thunder cracked outside. The lights in the room flickered once before steadying. I looked at Maribel, my voice low. "Is this enough to charge him?" She shook her head gently. "Not in criminal court." Fiona withdrew the complaint before it was processed, likely under pressure. That means there is no official record of wrongdoing, but it gives us insight into his pattern, a pattern of psychological manipulation, a pattern of exploiting emotional vulnerability. My heart tightened, not with surprise, but with recognition. It was the same pattern I had witnessed in Lena's trembling hands and hesitant breath. Maribel continued, "This is not the kind of case where someone leaves obvious evidence. He works in the shadows. He knows how to stay just inside the boundaries of the law while breaking everything that matters emotionally." Rain hammered against the windows. I stared at the folder, feeling a deep ache settle in my chest. A question formed in Maribel's eyes before she spoke it aloud. "Dorothy, you carry guilt. I can see it." She paused, then asked gently, "Why did you leave for so long?" The storm outside seemed to still for a moment. I had kept the truth buried beneath layers of strength and silence, but the weight of it began to rise. I set the wooden beads on the table. The soft clatter sounded louder than the thunder. "Before I left for New Zealand," I said quietly, "my doctor told me my lungs were deteriorating faster than expected. He said if I stayed in the same environment, I might have 5 years left, maybe less." My voice trembled, not from fear, but from memory. I did not leave because I wanted distance from my daughter. I left because I wanted more years for her. Maribel's expression softened with understanding. I swallowed hard. I thought if I stayed, she would spend her youth caring for me the way I spent years caring for hospice patients. I wanted to spare her that burden. I believed leaving was protecting her. I never thought my absence would open a door for someone like Graham. The storm surged again, the windows rattling softly. Maribel reached toward the folder, but her eyes stayed on me. "Dorothy," she said gently, "sacrifice without explanation often becomes a wound. You made a choice to survive. That is not abandonment. That is an act of love." Her words settled over me like warm air in the middle of winter. I had carried that truth silently for years, uncertain whether anyone would ever understand. and yet hearing it spoken aloud softened the edges of my guilt. Maribel straightened the papers on the table. What matters now is what we do with this truth. And with the evidence we are gathering, Graham's pattern is clear, his intentions are predictable, and that makes him vulnerable. I nodded, my breath steadying as the weight in my chest shifted from guilt to resolve. The storm outside began to ease, the thunder rolling away toward the hills. The room felt steadier. So did I. Maribel closed the folder with quiet finality. Tomorrow, we move forward. I picked up the wooden beads, feeling each carved surface press into my fingers. The storm had not broken us. It had awakened something, a truth long buried, a strength returning to its rightful place. And for the first time since coming home, I felt prepared for everything that would come next. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. I spent the early hours sitting at my kitchen table, the wooden bead necklace resting beside my cup of tea. I traced its familiar edges while replaying Maribel's findings in my mind. Patterns of coercion, a woman from the past, a truth he had repeated on my daughter. And now, the quiet spark I saw in Lena's eyes when she read my note. All of it formed a fragile thread of hope. I was washing my hands when my phone rang. The sound startled me. Sharp, unexpected. When I saw Lena's name on the screen, my breath caught. She had not called me in months. I answered immediately. "Mom," she whispered. The single word cracked as it left her throat. "I want to see you. Can we meet somewhere? Please." Her voice was thin, trembling, yet unmistakably hers. Hope rushed through me in a wave so strong it nearly buckled my knees. I held the phone tighter, keeping my tone steady for her sake. "Of course. Tell me where you are. I will come right now." She hesitated. I cannot talk for long. I just needed to say..." Her breath broke. "I miss you. I do not know what to do anymore." My heart opened and ached all at once. I moved to the window, needing air, needing something to hold on to. "Lena, listen to me. You are not alone. Whatever you are walking through, I will help you out of it. We can do this safely. Just tell me." A sudden rustling sound cut through the line. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps approached. Then a sharp gasp from Lena's end. Her voice shifted from fear to panic. "Graham, wait, please." The line crackled. Then his voice exploded into the receiver, rough and furious. "You stop this right now. Do you hear me? She is not your daughter anymore." The words sliced through the air with brutal clarity. My grip tightened around the phone, but I said nothing. I let the silence settle. Graham shouted again, louder this time. "Stay away from her. She belongs here." I did not respond. I could hear Lena sobbing in the background, muffled as if a hand had been placed over the phone. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Silence is not surrender. Silence is strategy. Graham waited for a reaction that did not come. The absence of my fear unnerved him. The line wavered. Then he hung up. I lowered the phone slowly, breathing in through my nose and out through my chest, grounding myself the way hospice work had taught me long ago. The house around me felt painfully still. No clock ticking, no kettle boiling, just the echo of words a man had no right to say. "Not your daughter anymore." I stood there until the tremor in my hands stilled. Then I placed the phone on the table and whispered to the quiet room, "She is mine, and she always will be." By the time I arrived at Maribel's office that afternoon, resolve had settled inside me like stone. She looked up from her desk, immediately reading the shift in my expression. "Dorothy, what happened?" I told her the truth. Every word, every sound, every moment of fear I heard in Lena's voice. I told her how Graham ripped the phone away, how he shouted into the receiver, how he claimed my daughter was no longer mine, and how I chose silence instead of the reaction he expected. Maribel exhaled slowly, then turned toward her filing cabinet. Her movements were precise, controlled, fueled by conviction. "This changes the timeline," she said. "We act now." She retrieved a thick folder and placed it in front of me. Inside were forms I recognized from past cases, requests for asset protections, emergency evaluations for psychological coercion, formal petitions to investigate undue influence, the kind of paperwork that begins a legal storm no manipulator can outrun. Her tone was steady as she explained, Lena's safety is now at risk. Emotional coercion is complicated, but this call proves a heightened level of control. He is monitoring her communication. He's preventing her from seeking support. This is an escalation. I clenched the wooden bead necklace in my hand. So what do we do first? Maribel slid a pen toward me. We file for protective oversight on the home and all joint accounts. That prevents him from draining funds or altering ownership. Then we request an immediate inquiry into psychological coercion. It will require documentation, witness accounts, behavioral patterns, everything we have been gathering. I nodded. The decision felt like stepping onto solid ground after months of sinking sand. She continued, Once we file, Graham will be notified. He will not react well, but that is why we proceed swiftly and quietly. Silence can be a weapon when used intentionally. Her words matched the pulse in my chest. Silence as power. Silence as protection. Silence as the first step toward reclaiming my daughter. I signed the forms one by one. The ink dried quickly under my fingers, as if the universe were impatient for action. When we finished, Maribel gathered the documents and placed them into a sealed envelope. These go to the courthouse first thing tomorrow, she said. By mid-morning, the protections will be active, and Graham will no longer control everything he thinks he controls. I let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar but unmistakable rise in me. Strength. Not loud, not vengeful, quiet, steady, certain. Tomorrow, everything will begin to shift. The next morning began with a heaviness that seemed to settle over the entire city. I could feel it in the air, in the slow movement of the clouds, in the quiet hum of traffic outside my window. Maribel called just after sunrise. Her voice was firm, purposeful. The filings went through, the judge approved temporary protective measures. We need to leave now. I grabbed my coat and slipped the wooden bead necklace into my hand, the beads warming slowly against my skin. As we drove toward Lena's neighborhood with 2 officers following behind, the world outside felt suspended. The tension was not chaotic. It was dense, focused. A storm gathering without wind. When we reached the house, the officers stepped out first. Their presence was calm but authoritative, their uniforms and clipped radios bringing a steady gravity to the scene. Maribel approached the front door with the folded court order tucked beneath her arm. I walked beside her, each step measured, each breath purposeful. I reminded myself why we were here, not for revenge, not for rage, for Lena, for the life she had forgotten how to claim. One of the officers knocked firmly. A long pause followed, punctuated only by the soft rustle of leaves overhead. The door opened. Graham stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief as he saw the officers and the papers in Maribel's hand. "What is this?" he demanded. "A lawful court order," Maribel replied. "Effective immediately. You are required to step aside and allow access to Ms. Hale. All financial activities are suspended pending review, and you are to vacate the property temporarily while an investigation into coercive control is conducted." Graham laughed once, a sharp breath through his nose. "She is fine. She does not need any of you." I stepped forward. "I want to see my daughter." "No." He blocked the doorway slightly, his shoulders tensing. "She does not want to see you." One of the officers cleared his throat. "Sir, you need to step back." Graham hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Even so, his voice rose. "She does not belong to that woman anymore." His words echoed the ones he shouted through the phone the day before. But this time, I did not flinch. I lifted my chin and spoke calmly. "That is not your decision to make." The officer stepped forward again. "Sir, step aside now." Graham looked between us, frustration tightening the corners of his mouth. Then he finally moved. Only a few inches, but enough. Behind him, Lena appeared at the end of the hallway. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, her shoulders drawn in, her steps hesitant. Her gaze stayed fixed on the floor until she reached the edge of the living room. Only then did she risk looking up. Her eyes meet mine. Everything slowed. The world outside fell silent. The officers, Maribel, the tension between door and hallway. Even Graham's breath stalled in his chest. "Lena," I said softly, "look at me. One time. Just once." The words left my mouth with no force, no demand. They carried only the truth, a truth I hoped she could still recognize. Her chin trembled. Her breath shook. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears she had learned to swallow. And then, slowly, she lifted her face. Her eyes met mine fully, not through fear, not through hesitation, but through something deeper, something awakening. Her voice cracked. "Mom." That one word broke open the quiet. The pivot arrived. Slow, heavy, certain. I felt the wooden beads pressed against my palm. My breath deepened. Hers matched mine. A rhythm we once shared when she was a child afraid of storms. I took a single step forward. She took one in return, then another. Her movements were small but resolute. A woman rediscovering her own gravity. Graham stepped forward sharply. "Lena, stop." She froze for half a second. Her body stiffened with old instinct, but then she closed her eyes. Just once. And when she opened them, the fear that had shaped her for months loosened its grip. She walked past him. He reached out a hand as if to grab her arm. One of the officers raised a firm voice. "Sir, do not touch her." Graham's hand dropped. His anger rose but had nowhere to land. Lena reached me with trembling steps. I opened my arms slowly, giving her a choice. She stepped into them, her entire body shaking as though she had been holding her breath for months. I held her close, steadying her with the quiet strength she once believed she had lost. The officer stepped forward again. "Sir, you are required to leave the property until the investigation concludes. You may gather essential items only." Graham looked at us, fury simmering beneath his skin. But the law stood between him and the control he no longer held. He turned toward the staircase, muttering under his breath, grabbing a small bag. When he descended again, he avoided looking at me. Or at her. The officers escorted him out the front door. The sound of it closing behind him felt like the first clean breath after months of smoke. Lena leaned into me, tears finally falling. I did not tell her it was all right. I did not tell her not to cry. I simply held her, letting her grief drain into a space safe enough to receive it. Maribel approached gently. Her voice is low. "He is gone for now, and the house is protected. You are both safe." Lena nodded against my shoulder, her voice barely audible. "I want to come with you." I tightened my hold on her. "Then that is exactly what we will do." Outside, the day brightened slightly, as if the sun had been waiting for this moment. And for the first time since returning to Austin, I felt daylight reach a part of my heart that had been dark for far too long. Lena stayed with me the first night after the court order. She fell asleep on the couch in my living room, still wearing the sweater she had clutched when she walked out of Graham's house. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the room while I sat nearby, watching her breathing rise and fall in uneven waves. Every few minutes, she startled. A sharp inhale, a quiet flinch, the remnants of fear still threaded through her body. I covered her with a blanket and sat beside her until morning. Over the next few days, the reality of what she had endured began to surface. She woke from sleep with trembling hands. Loud sounds made her startle. She apologized constantly, even for things that required no apology. When she washed the dishes, she moved with practiced caution, as if expecting to be corrected. When I asked simple questions, her gaze flicked to the doorway out of old habit, checking for someone who was no longer there. The first time she broke down, it happened while she was folding laundry in my bedroom. She pressed a shirt to her face and sank onto the edge of the bed, her shoulders shaking. I sat beside her, letting her cry into the fabric without filling the space with questions. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were red and exhausted. "Mom," she whispered, "I feel like I failed you. I feel like I failed myself." I shook my head gently. "You did not fail anyone, Lena. You survived something that tried to shrink you. That is not failure. That is endurance." Her chin trembled. But I let him control everything. I forgot who I was. I took her hand in mine, letting the warmth of her palms settle against the wooden beads I still carried. You did not betray me. You only forgot that you were strong long before he ever entered your life. Her lip quivered at those words. She leaned into me, not as a child, but as a woman learning to rebuild herself one breath at a time. Maribel visited that afternoon and brought a list of therapists she trusted. There is someone I want you to meet, she said gently to Lena. She specializes in coercive control and trauma responses. You are not alone in this, and what you are feeling is not weakness. It is recovery. Lena hesitated at first. The idea of telling a stranger what she had endured felt overwhelming. But 2 days later, she agreed to try. I drove her to the clinic myself. She kept her hands clasped in her lap as we walked inside, her breath quick and shallow. When she sat with the therapist for the first time, I waited in the lobby with a magazine I never opened. After an hour, she emerged with eyes softer than they had been in weeks. It helped, she whispered. I think I want to go again. And she did. Session after session, she learned to name what had happened to her without shame. She learned how coercive control can turn love into obedience, how fear can wear the face of affection, how isolation can make the strongest woman doubt her own reflection. Slowly, her shoulders lifted. Her breath deepened. Her gaze steadied. The wounds did not vanish, but they began to heal with intention. Meanwhile, Graham tried to strike back in the only way he knew. He filed a complaint claiming I had interfered in his relationship. He tried to argue that the court order was unjust. He even attempted to provide bank statements he insisted would prove his innocence. But Maribel had already gathered the documents that revealed his pattern, the falsified signatures, the loan agreements, the withdrawal history, and Fiona Clark's testimony, which she agreed to provide once she learned someone else had suffered the same manipulation. When the judge reviewed the evidence, the decision was swift. Graham's complaint was dismissed. His credibility was severely damaged. Any attempt to regain access to Lena or her finances was denied, and the court extended protective measures while the investigation continued. The news reached us on a quiet Tuesday morning. Lena sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea held between her palms. When I told her the decision, she exhaled slowly. Relief washed across her face, but so did something else. Grief. The kind that comes when the truth becomes undeniable. She looked up at me. I really thought he loved me. I placed my hand over hers. Wanting love does not make you weak. Giving it to the wrong person does not make you foolish. It makes you human. And now you are free to choose yourself again. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not shaped by fear. They were shaped by release. For the first time in months, she smiled, soft, trembling, real. And in that moment, I knew the hardest part was behind us. The healing had begun. The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet steadiness I had not felt in years. Each morning, Lena woke a little lighter. She still had moments when her breath hitched or her hands trembled, but the shadows no longer controlled her. Healing is not a straight line. It is a gentle climb, and she was beginning to trust her footing again. One afternoon, after a therapy session, she turned to me in the car and said softly, I think I'm ready to live on my own again. Not far, just somewhere I can breathe without remembering everything that happened. The way she said it carried both fear and courage. I nodded and told her I believed in her. I had always believed in her. Within a week, she found a small apartment near downtown Austin. It was nothing extravagant, a modest one-bedroom with tall windows and a balcony that overlooked the street. But when she opened the door for the first time and stepped inside, something shifted in her posture. Her shoulders lifted, her breath deepened, her eyes scanned the empty space as if seeing the outlines of a future she had once abandoned. I watched her run her fingers across the windowsill and smile gently to herself. She began unpacking slowly, books she had kept boxed for years, sketch pads filled with architectural drawings, a collection of pencils worn down from old dreams. She placed a plant near the window and turned to me. I want this place to feel like mine. Really mine. I smiled. Then let it grow with you. A few days later, she returned to the architecture firm she once worked for. They welcomed her back with warmth and understanding. She told me that during her first lunch break, she stood outside the building and felt the full weight of her independence settle over her. Not heavy, not overwhelming, just real, the kind of reality she had missed without knowing she missed it. While she rebuilt her life, I turned my attention to the backyard of my own home. The hydrangeas had gone wild during the months I was away. Their branches reached across the soil like forgotten hopes. I spent hours pruning them back, pulling weeds and resetting the stone path Lena and I once laid together when she was 10 years old. As I worked, memories rose with each movement. Her small hands were covered in dirt. Her laughter echoed across the yard, the way she used to tuck fallen petals behind my ear and declare our garden the most magical place in Texas. Rebuilding it now felt like reclaiming a part of both of us. One Saturday morning, she stopped by after grocery shopping. She walked into the yard and inhaled deeply. "Mom, it looks alive again." I brushed dirt from my gloves. "So do you." She laughed softly, her eyes warming. She helped me trim the last few branches. While we worked, I told her the words I had carried inside me since the day she left Graham's house. "You deserve a life that feels gentle, not one you have to earn by shrinking yourself." She paused, her hands stilling over the blossoms. Then she repeated a sentence I once told her long ago, a sentence I whispered during the darkest months after Elijah passed. "Mom, you said that I owe myself a kinder life than the one pain tried to hand me." I nodded. Yes, and it is still true. She placed a fallen hydrangea petal in my palm. Then she smiled with a softness I had not seen in years. Then I owe myself exactly that. A life that is tender, a life that is mine. We both laughed quietly at the matching words, a shared echo, a circle closing gently instead of snapping shut. Later that evening, we sat on the back porch with cups of warm tea. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long streaks of gold across the newly revived garden. Lena leaned her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was a child afraid of thunderstorms. Only this time, she did it not out of fear, but out of comfort. It felt like a beginning. She whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I rested my hand over hers. "You came back to yourself. I only walked with you while you remembered the way." She looked at the hydrangeas glowing softly in the dusk. "I think I am finally ready for whatever comes next." I followed her gaze and felt the same truth rising in my chest. A beginning. Quiet. Steady, deserved. The sun rose gently the next morning, painting soft gold across the quiet streets of my neighborhood. I stepped outside with a light jacket around my shoulders and the wooden bead necklace warm in my hand. I often walked at this hour, when the world had not yet decided what it wanted to be. There was something healing in the slowness of it, in the way the dew clung to the grass as though refusing to let go of the night. Today, the air felt different, lighter, calmer, like the beginning of a new chapter, rather than the end of one. As I walked past the hydrangeas in my backyard, still glowing faintly from yesterday's pruning, I felt Elijah's presence more clearly than I had in years. Not as a ghost, not as longing, but as a steady warmth inside my chest, a reminder of the promises we once made, and the daughter who carried both of us in her heart even when she lost sight of her own strength. I tightened my grip on the wooden beads. Their surface had molded itself over time to the shape of my fingers. They held every prayer I had whispered, every fear, every hope. They were the one thing I never left behind, even when I traveled across the ocean in search of borrowed time. My steps eventually carried me toward the front gate of Lena's old neighborhood. The morning light reflected off the guard booth windows. Gus, the longtime gatekeeper, was standing at the entrance with a thermos of coffee in his hand. His cap sat slightly crooked, as it always did. When he saw me approaching, he broke into a wide, gentle smile. "Well, would you look at that?" he said. "Ms. Hale, you look brighter today." His words settled over me with warmth. I took a slow breath before answering. "It has been a long road, Gus, but yes, I feel lighter." He nodded knowingly. I had a feeling things were turning around. Sometimes people lose their way for a while, but the ones who love them do not stop shining for them, helps them find their way back. I felt emotion rise quietly in my chest, not heavy, not painful, just full. Thank you, Gus, for watching over her, for noticing when she could not speak for herself. He tipped his cap gently. Every soul deserves someone looking out for them. I continued my walk, each step carrying me further into the soft morning light. Birds perched on power lines above me, their calls blending into the rhythm of the day. As I turned down the street toward home, I let the silence settle, not as an emptiness, but as clarity. When all of this began, I thought I was fighting for justice, for truth, for the right to protect what mattered. And while all of that was true, it was not the heart of the journey. What I found instead was something far deeper. I found my daughter again, not the woman shaped by fear, not the shadow Graham had molded, but the girl who once ran barefoot in our backyard, the woman who stood in her new apartment with hope trembling in her voice, the person who had always been there beneath the layers of pain. I paused beneath a large oak tree, letting the wind brush against my face. The sunlight pooled at my feet. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not because the past had vanished, but because my daughter had stepped back into her own life with courage she did not yet recognize as hers. I whispered into the quiet morning air. I did not win anything. I simply found the child who once called me mother. The words left my mouth like a soft release, dissolving into the stillness of the day. As I neared my house, I saw Lena's car parked at the curb. She stood by the porch steps with a small paper bag in her hands. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the careful smile she had worn during her darkest months, but a warm, open one that reached her eyes, the kind of smile that only comes when someone finally breathes in their own freedom. She walked toward me slowly and slipped her arm through mine. "Morning, Mom." "I brought breakfast. I thought we could eat in the garden." I nodded, and we stepped inside together. We sat beneath the hydrangeas we had revived, sipping warm tea while the breeze carried the scent of blossoms across the yard. Lena looked around quietly before speaking. "You know," she said, her voice gentle, "you once told me that I owe myself a kinder life than the one pain tried to hand me." I smiled. "And you remembered." She nodded, her eyes soft. "I owe myself exactly that, and I am going to build it. Day by day, brick by brick, like a house worth living in." We both laughed softly, letting the sound drift between us like a healing note. As the morning light filtered through the leaves, I felt the entire journey settle inside me with a peaceful finality. Healing had not erased what happened. It had not rewritten the past, but it has given us something equally powerful, a beginning. And with that beginning came a truth I finally had the clarity to speak. There are children who do not leave us. They only lose themselves for a while, until love becomes quiet enough to guide them home. I let the words rest between us, carried by the rising sun. Before we end, I want to speak directly to you. If you believe I did the right thing, or if you have lived through something similar, share your story. Your voice may be the one that reaches someone still living in silence. Your truth may be the key that helps them find their way home.